Hello everybody, welcome back to Wolfeei, because today we're going to be looking at blockwars balancing, because this is something that probably should be talked about just because there's a lot of discussion going on, right, regarding some of the team balancing this time around. And I just want to give some insight, right, from the guy who made the teams, who did the balancing. I want to give some insight as to what decisions were made, how certain decisions need to be made for team balancing, etc. So hopefully this will help give you some insight, whether you are critical of the balancing or not. This might help just to gain a little bit more perspective on how certain things work. On screen right now you see the Tubathon Block Wars, which is the Minecraft portion of Tubbo's boot camp. I think they're going to do a second rendition of Block Wars today. So assuming this, well actually this video will be uploaded tomorrow, so it's gonna have happened yesterday. But if you want to watch the VODs, if you want to watch some extra Blockwars content, check out Toby's VOD from yesterday, I guess, to see the fun stuff happen on screen. Anyways, let's get into the team balancing a little bit. I have the sheet that uses balancing on another tab. I cannot show you it because it has information that I don't think needs to be shared necessarily, and also just because I don't need to share the entire process of how things work, but I'll try to give you some perspective. Again, a reminder that as much as I like giving transparency, I can't give all the info that you may want, and this is partially a privilege that I am giving you this information because other events don't. So yeah, anyways, let's get into the teams. I'll just go over them one by one. I'm using the Reddit screen that showed everything just because I think it'll help quickly cycle through the teams. So first off, the red team. The red team is a peculiar one in terms of balancing because this is one of the first teams that was locked in. One thing that is important to note for this event is that certain teams were confirmed before other teams were confirmed. The reason for that is because, as I've explained in the past, this cycle was a little bit difficult to get a full roster complete for because we had a goal of reaching a certain amount of women included, which was a side goal that we didn't advertise. It was meant to be a casual thing, but we still wanted to try to hit it, with the goal being above 50%. The final result ended up being slightly below 50%. I think we ended up getting 19-ish, either one less or one more than 19 women in the roster. But the goal was over half, which we unfortunately were not able to succeed with, but we do not need to explain specifically why. However, this team ended up being confirmed early because at the time, this was roughly 2 weeks before the event, so like a week ago almost, maybe a little later actually. We were getting to a point where we were worried that if we didn't start announcing some of the teams to the players, people may no longer be available once we do announce the teams, and it's better to give some teams some confirmation early to lock in that they are actually ready and able to play than risk announcing everything too late and multiple people dropping out, which has happened in the past. So that is something where we wanted to avoid a potential issue of people subbing out. This team got confirmed early because it is a more Minecrafter focused team with a bunch of people who are familiar with each other, and if you look at the remaining parts of the roster, it makes sense for these people to be grouped together on this team. One thing that is important to note is at this current moment when this team was made, we did not know how many top players were going to be included yet. I think we ended up getting 1 or 2 extra top players included that were originally not planned to be included. Sorry for those, who were almost going to get benched, but at least you're playing. But there were a few people, I think from memory, Curryway I think was originally not going to be in, and I'm fairly sure Raduns was not going to be in initially, of course, which meant that obviously the high end of performances was going to be a little bit more up in the air, in which I think Jumper was predicted to get a slightly higher placement than their average, and I think Oppo currently also has a lower average than some of their past placements. However, because Oppo is a infrequent player, it is kind of hard to guess how well Oppo will perform. However, I do think this team has a lot of potential. They are a team that have one of the strongest lower half compared to any other team. They potentially have either the best or top 3 best lower half out of all the teams, if I'm looking at the stats correctly. The other teams that have stronger lower halves, I think the bottom 2 strongest, the bottom 2 on each team, of which the strongest should be either orange or yellow, because the 4th player on orange is Boger, and he averages 30th, and the 4th player on yellow statistically is Lee, who averages 24th according to my sheet. So this is 3rd place in terms of the best low-end average compared to other teams, which is very good. Low-end average placement is very important to be able to perform well as a full team combined. Additionally, this team features Cherryfire, who is new. I don't really know how well Cherryfire will perform, but I am aware that Cherryfire is was one of the more competent players in Rising 3, which to me sounds like they could potentially get around the middle in a Block Wars event, which is what they were balanced as. So that is the first team. Next up is Orange. I'll try to yap a little bit less, but I gave a lot of info early on to explain some things. This team, I've seen a lot of people talk about this team being weak. Statistically, this team is not. Now, I am aware that stats do not mean everything, and I'm not saying that the stats explain why this team exactly is the way it is, but there is an important factor to consider, and that is the average team placement that a lot of these people have. This team's lowest average team placement is Emerum, who has an average team placement of 3.8, and the highest is SK with 1.5, in which obviously we want to give some other people a chance to be able to perform. So the decision making for this team was to give them a team that has the potential of doing well, but isn't one that is super likely to get top 2, because they already get top 2 a lot, and at some point you can't make every team perfectly balanced, because there's going to be people who more commonly end up placing a certain amount of placements higher or lower than others. That leads me into the next team, which is Yellow. This team is a peculiar one because this team is statistically, and again, doesn't mean everything, statistically in terms of average score and average placement, the strongest. However, there is an issue with that. There is a one-time player on this team who had only played once on a very strong team, that being Wolfeei. That means that I factored this team in to perform a little bit weaker because Wolfei's one-time performance is probably significantly better than what he would do on a more solo-based performance. That also factors into the average team placement, where Wolfei's average team placement is 1st, but the rest of the team is quite a bit lower, in which this team would rank probably 4th or 3rd lowest in average team placement, assuming Wolfei's average team placement isn't 1st, but is newcomer-esque, which is 6th. So this team is balanced in the sense that they are very well-rounded. They have by far the best 4th frag out of any team statistically. That doesn't mean that their 4th frag will do the best out of all the 4th frags, being Lee, by the way, but that is factually, on my sheet, correct. From stats only, they have the best 4th frag. That doesn't excuse, does this team end up getting, whatever, 7th or 2nd or whatever, doesn't excuse whatever ends up happening, but that is the explanation as to what happened with the balancing on this team. Next up, also one thing to note is Misty statistically is a little higher than her recent performances, but with a team like this having multiple average place players and people with a good amount of experience where she doesn't need to explain how the event works consistently, they should be able to perform decently well. Next up is the green team. This one is a very interesting case because this team has the lowest average team placements, the quote-unquote worst average team placement, being 6, roughly, right? Which is pretty low on average. However, that does include, I think, a sample size of 1 of Rattles' stats because of how stats currently are counted. We don't count some of the much more in the past events. We only count recent ones, in which I'm fairly sure it is using a 1 sample size of when Rattles played in Block Wars 12 on a very weak team. Or at least at the time a very weak team, right? So this maybe nowadays it could be a bit better, but at the time a very weak team. This team statistically is one of the weaker ones on average score and average placement. However, that is using Rattles as being predicted 23rd, which was their past performance, and getting a score of 1840 from their past performance. I think Rattles will do a lot better because they have experience from playing Block Wars Series 2, or Series 3, sorry, and I think they're going to be just a bit more familiar with the event, and also have Purpled, who I think is a bit of a better leader in Block Wars compared to Fruit, if I'm being fully honest, and that's why I think this team has a chance at doing pretty well. Next up, though, is Aqua, which is definitely one that needs some explanation. This team was the last team to be confirmed. I cannot say exactly what the original plan for this team was, but a lot of the developments that happened with this team were very, very recent. As in, a day before the first team announcements, Janet and Ovely were confirmed, and Ant and 5UP were not locked to be a duo, but if these two newcomers were to be invited, they'd have to be together, which meant that there was a squad of 4, right? The reason I said this on stream as well, the Aqua team was not confirmed during day 1 team announcements because the 5th slot was going to be up in the air. 5UP was going to look for who he wanted specifically on the team. The person he asked was not able to make it or was not available, in which I looked at signups and I looked at people combined who deserve to play based off of recent amount of events played, were balanced statistically to go onto this team. And that's pretty much it. That led to me picking Cookie God because on average, his placement is 19th and his score is 2100 something, right? Not super relevant. However, one thing that is important to factor is statistically speaking, I think 5UP is a bit below what he would perform nowadays, and Cookie God as a 3rd frag probably is a little bit better than his current average stats. But that doesn't mean that this team is guaranteed to be the best. I do think it is most likely to be the best, but it is not guaranteed to be the best. So that's the explanation for that team. Next up, Blue Team. Blue Team was the second last team to be confirmed, if I remember correctly. I guess I'll say for the rest of the teams as well. Green Team was one of the first 3 teams confirmed. If specifically, I think it was the 3rd team to be confirmed. First team confirmed was red. Second team confirmed was pink. 3rd team confirmed was green. I don't recall the exact order for the rest, but the other... so blue and aqua were definitely the last 2, and I think orange, yellow, and purple all got revealed around the same time or confirmed around the same time. This team was confirmed 7th, so this was the 2nd most recent team to be confirmed. The build-up of this team was interesting. Della was not originally going to be on this team. There was a different person invited for this team, but they had to drop out late because we confirmed the team a bit too late. Della did fit very well on this team, thus we invited her, or I invited her more specifically. This team's composition is interesting. It has 2 people, or more so, it has Curry as the lead player, who is consistently very promising in Block Wars. Fur is the most peculiar case on this team because Fur's range of placements is top 10 to 20, like 5th-ish, right? It's like a pretty wide range, with the average currently being 18.3. Then Ruben has been on a recent arc where he's actually performed really well. I think Ruben will end up being the 2nd frag on this team, most likely, but potentially Fur could lock in and pop off. And CJ has had 2 recent placements from the non-rookies events, where one, he was on a really weak team and placed, I think, bottom 5, and then the other, he was on a much stronger team where he ended up placing, I think, around the 25th range, if I remember correctly. I think like 27th or something. He is statistically around 30th, which is pretty reasonable for his prediction this time around. One thing that's also very important to note is this is one of the rosters that has one of the more high quantity, lower end players, quote unquote, the guaranteed bottom 10s is what you would maybe call it, compared to other regular Block Wars events, because this is a regular Block Wars event. It is a numbered event after all. And that does mean that certain people that you would maybe think are close to 30th or would usually get maybe around 30th, slightly below or slightly above, might do significantly better because there are a lot of people that are below their skill level included this time around. For example, when we look at the next team, Anthos is an example where Anthos usually places around 30th, but I think this time around he actually has a good chance to get around 25th. This team is a peculiar one as well because I already revealed publicly that originally Hannah was on this team instead of Radoons. Red did end up getting subbed in, who is statistically similar to Hannah. The main problem that we were dealing with is in terms of who had signed up, there were very few cohesive sub-ins that we could work in that would be around the same skill level as what was here before, without either significantly buffing the team or significantly nerfing the team, in which Radoons was the closest, as much as it was a slight buff, closest sub for this team. Additionally, this team has multiple players on it that have not had recent good teams. Aside from JoJo, every other player on this team has an average team placement of about 5.5, with Grape being the exception from playing one time in Block Wars Rookies, having an average team placement of 7th. Thus, this is the 2nd lowest team in terms of average team placement. Thus, it deserved to be a little bit stronger than usual. which is why this team is the way it is. I still think that, assuming everybody plays at least average, this should be the actual strongest team in the event, with JoJo and Red on average placing top 10, BTMC probably placing around 20th, and then Anthos placing around 25th. Should be a very promising performance from them. Grape probably getting around to 35th would be probably the most likely team to end up placing first or second, in my opinion. And then finally, we have the pink team, which is a very interesting one. As mentioned, this team got confirmed second overall because the Haka, Ruze, and Shinri trio was talked about after the January event, after Block Wars 14. The decision-making for who was included on this team was partially simple. Feinberg was always going to be on this team because he is a very good player to help lead players and introduce people to the event, in which, of course, Haka and Shinri have played before, Haka having played twice, but Ruze is new, and with Shinri and Haka playing irregularly, it is important for them to have somebody to rely on in terms of being able to perform better. Additionally, the decision-making for the second player on this team, which ended up being Shane, of course, was tricky. Shane is risky to have as a second frag because obviously that is a very strong duo. It is probably the strongest duo you've ever seen in recent Block Wars history, Fine and Shane, that is. However, there is one important thing to consider. If you pick a worse player than Shane to be the second frag, this team undoubtedly wouldn't be a top 2 team. With Shane being the second frag, it has a chance at being a top 2 team, which is important because, as mentioned in my day 2 reveal video at the end, it is not necessary for either Fine or Shane to have a guaranteed losing team. That has nothing to do with Haka, Ruze, or Shinri. That just has to do with overall team balancing compared to other teams. So it is important for the second frag, even when Feinberg is there, and with Haka, Ruze, and Shinri being included as well, it is important for the second frag to be also somebody who can be either a lead player or a very strong mechanical player. Again, very few options were available to make for a perfectly balanced team in this case, and with the request of Fine and Shane for them being a duo, especially post the Boblu event, this was the most logical result to go off of with what was happening alongside the other teams in terms of balancing. Another thing to note importantly, this is partially scuffed because there is a newcomer on this team, and also because the Feinberg factor is not fully factored in statistically here, but to an extent it is. This team ranks in the top half in terms of average score, which includes Fine's really good score and Shane's score as well, of course. So that is factored in. Fine's individual improvement is factored in. In terms of average placement, it is the weakest team, but only by a 0.1 difference compared to the red team as of right now. But the difference there is that there is a likely chance that Shinri, Haka, and Ruze will not be the bottom 3 players in the event, which is what they are statistically balanced as based off of their recent performances. However, I do not really see Haka, Ruze, and Shinri placing outside of the bottom 10, which doesn't mean that this team can't get top 2, but it does mean that it will be a little bit more difficult. The reason for that is the included gameplay. I cannot reveal which games are going to be in the roster this time around, but I can say one thing. Hypothetically speaking, there are going to be individual games included in this event where the quote-unquote Feinberg difference cannot apply. It cannot work. For example, Race, Party, Trailblazers. Aside from advice that can be given by the top frags on these teams, they cannot lead or carry their teams individually, or more so, they can't carry their teammates to perform better individually. They can only perform even better individually themselves. So Fine and Shane could set 2-point records, right? Just like how in Ender Cup, Purple and Fruit broke the point record separately. They could both set the point record for Trailblazers, hypothetically, right? And that could maybe make their team perform super well in Trailblazers. But on average, it is going to be a little bit more difficult for them to perform. I don't think that means that these individual games are exclusively the reason why this team might not do super well. For all we know, they could have a unlucky Tomb Tines. For all we know, they could have an amazing race performance. We don't really know, ultimately, right? But we just have to assume that there are going to be games that certain teams are going to be really good at, and certain games that certain teams are going to not be very good at, and that'll ultimately result in why teams are close to balanced. I will say this is probably one of the most inconsistent balanced rosters. There are some teams that definitely stand out to be most likely to be strong and teams that stand out to be most likely to be weak, but I don't think that defines where each team will place, because some people pretend like this is the most predictable block wars of all time, which I don't think is very much correct, because there's been situations in the past where the top 2 teams have been extremely obvious and every other team seemed like it stood absolutely no chance. And I don't think that's the case this time around. I think there's a lot of variety and variance that could happen in terms of the placements and performances this time around, and I'm curious to see how it will end up going. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I hope that helps explain a little bit for how this event balanced, or how the balancing for this event went. If you have any questions, I probably can't really elaborate too much on how things worked, but hopefully this gains some perspective as to why certain decision making was made. Also, another thing that is important to note for Aqua team that I forgot is that this team does feature 2 newcomers, and having newcomers is generally a little bit more difficult to perform with. So that also is a partial factor as to why this team is slightly stronger on average, even when 5UP has had stronger teams recently. So that is another thing to note. Anyways, thank you for watching. I hope that helps, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.